One warm evening, as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the village called Idomu, a stranger arrived. She was a fat black woman, dressed in a bright, flowing dress that billowed around her as she walked. Her face was stern, her eyes sharp, and she carried an air of mystery that immediately caught the villagers' attention. "Who is she?" whispered Chioma, a young girl, to her friend, Amoka, as they watched the woman from a distance. "I don't know," replied Amoka, her eyes wide with curiosity. "But she looks different. I've never seen her before." The woman settled in a small, abandoned hut on the outskirts of the village. She did not speak to anyone, nor did she ask for help. She simply moved in, unpacked her belongings, and shut the door. The villagers, known for their hospitality, were taken aback by her aloofness. "Good evening, Ma," greeted Sharon, the village midwife, as she approached the hut the next morning. "Welcome to Idomu. Do you need any help?" The woman glanced at Sharon but said nothing. She simply shook her head and went back inside, leaving Sharon standing there, puzzled. Days turned into weeks, and the woman remained a mystery. She was seen early in the morning, fetching water from the stream. And late at night, tending to a small garden she had started behind her hut. But she spoke to no one and participated in none of the village activities. "I wonder why she doesn't speak to anyone," mused Chief Chima during a village meeting. "It's unlike anyone we've ever had in Idomu." "Maybe she has a dark past," suggested Judith, a farmer. "Or perhaps she is just shy." Rumors began to spread. Some said she was a witch, others thought she was mourning the loss of her family. But no one knew for sure. The children were both scared and intrigued, often daring each other to go near her hut. Early one morning, Chichi decided to cook a large pot of her special stew. The rich aroma of spices and herbs filled her small hut and soon spread throughout the village. The villagers, drawn by the mouth-watering smell, began to wonder what Chichi was up to. "Do you smell that?" asked Amoka, pausing her chores and taking a deep breath. "Yes," replied Chioma, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I wonder what she's cooking." Later that day, Chichi made her way to the village market, carrying several pots of her stew. She set up a small restaurant and began ladling out portions into bowls. Initially, a few villagers approached her restaurant, hesitant but intrigued by the delicious smell. "Good day, Ma," said Sharon, eyeing the steaming pot. "What are you selling?" "It's stew," replied Chichi with a small smile. "Would you like to try some?" Sharon nodded, and Chichi handed her a bowl. As soon as Sharon took the first bite, her eyes lit up with delight. "This is amazing," she exclaimed. "Everyone, come and try this." Word spread quickly, and soon a crowd had gathered around Chichi's restaurant. People were jostling and pushing, eager to get a taste of the mysterious woman's stew. The line grew longer and longer, with villagers patiently waiting their turn. The villagers couldn't get enough of her delicious stew, and they kept coming back for more. The market buzzed with excitement, and soon, people were fighting to get to the front of the line. Despite the chaos, Chichi remained calm, serving each customer with a gentle smile. By the end of the day, every pot was empty, and the villagers were left amazed and satisfied. As the sun set and the market began to clear, Chichi locked up her restaurant and headed back to her hut. The villagers were still talking about her stew, their taste buds enchanted by the flavors. Chichi had made her mark on the village of Idomu, and the mystery surrounding her only deepened. "Who is this woman?" murmured Chioma to Amoka as they walked home. "And how does she make such magical food?" "I don't know," replied Amoka, her mind racing with questions. "But I hope she cooks again soon." The next day, the market was abuzz with talk of Chichi's stew. The other food sellers, who had watched in disbelief as their regular customers flocked to her restaurant, gathered early in the morning, whispering and casting suspicious glances in her direction. "This is impossible," muttered Mama Chika, a seasoned food vendor. How can someone new sell so well on their first day? I lost all my customers yesterday, grumbled Papa Is, stirring a pot of soup. They all went to her. Mama Nkechi, who sold jollof rice, nodded in agreement. There must be something in her food. It's not natural. As Chichi arrived at the market with her pot of stew, the other vendors watched her closely. They noticed how quickly the villagers gathered around her restaurant, eagerly waiting for their share. "It's happening again," said Mama Chika, frustration evident in her voice. "What are we going to do?" "We can't let her ruin our businesses," Papa Is replied. "We need to find out her secret." Mama Nkechi approached Chichi's restaurant, feigning friendliness. "Good morning, Chichi," she said with a forced smile. "Your stew was quite popular yesterday. What's your secret?" Chichi looked at Mama Nkechi with a mixture of dread and anger, but she managed to keep cool. Mama Nkechi narrowed her eyes. "Are you sure there's nothing else? No special spices or herbs?" Chichi shook her head. "No," Chichi replied coldly. Unsatisfied with the answer, Mama Nkechi returned to the other vendors. "She's hiding something," she whispered. "We need to keep an eye on her." The food vendors decided to band together, determined to uncover the truth. They watched Chichi's every move, hoping to catch a glimpse of her secret ingredient or technique. But no matter how hard they tried, they found nothing out of the ordinary. "Or maybe she's using charm," Mama Chika said, her voice low. "We should be careful." Despite their suspicions, the vendors couldn't deny the impact Chichi was having on the market. Their sales continued to drop as more and more villagers chose her stew over their offerings. The frustration grew, and tensions rose among the once harmonious community. Every day, Chichi, now fondly known as Mama Cook, continued to bring her delectable stew to the market. The villagers eagerly awaited her arrival, forming long lines even before she set up her restaurant. Her fame had spread beyond Idomu, attracting customers from neighboring villages who came to taste the magical stew everyone was talking about. "Good morning, Mama Cook," greeted Sharon, one of her regular customers, with a bright smile. "I brought my sister from the next village to taste your stew." "Good morning, Sharon," Chichi replied, serving a generous portion of stew. "I'm glad you could bring her. Enjoy." The market buzzed with excitement as more and more people crowded around her restaurant. The other vendors watched in envy as their restaurantess remained largely ignored. "She's selling out every day," said Mama Chika, shaking her head. "I don't understand it. People are coming from all over just for her food," Papa Is added, frustration evident in his voice. "What makes her stew so special?" As the days went by, the influx of customers grew. The villagers of Idomu took pride in Mama Cook, but the other vendors were left struggling to keep their businesses afloat. Some tried to replicate her stew, using similar ingredients and techniques, but none could capture the unique flavor of Chichi's cooking. "She must be doing something we can't see," muttered Mama Nkechi, stirring her pot of jollof rice. "It's not just about the ingredients." Despite the growing tension among the vendors, Chichi remained oblivious to their discontent. She continued to cook with the same love and care, greeting each customer with a warm smile and a kind word. "Your stew is the best I've ever tasted," said a man from a neighboring village, handing Chichi a few coins. "I've traveled far just to buy it." "Thank you," Chichi replied, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I'm happy you enjoy it." As Chichi packed up her restaurant at the end of the day, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her pots were empty, and her customers were satisfied. While the villagers of Idomu and beyond marveled at Mama Cook's delicious stew, none suspected the dark secret behind her extraordinary success. Unbeknownst to everyone, Chichi's stew contained a secret ingredient that she kept hidden from the world. Each morning before heading to the market, Chichi followed a peculiar ritual. When she felt the urge to urinate, she would do so in a small container. This container held the secret to her charm, her own urine. She would later use this liquid in the preparation of her famous stew. One evening, after another day of selling out her stew, Chi-Chi sat in her small hut, reflecting on her success. She smiled to herself, knowing that her secret was safe. If they only knew, she murmured, shaking her head. But they will never find out. The next morning, Chi-Chi went about her usual routine. She collected her urine in the container and carefully set it aside. She then began preparing her stew, mixing the usual ingredients with the secret liquid. As the aroma of her cooking filled the air, Chi-Chi hummed a tune. She knew that the villagers would soon be lining up at her restaurant, eager for a taste of her magical stew. At the market, the crowd was already gathering. Sharon, one of Chi-Chi's regular customers, chatted with a friend while they waited. "Have you ever tasted anything like her stew?" Sharon asked, licking her lips in anticipation. "Never," her friend replied. "I wonder what her secret is." As Chi-Chi set up her restaurant, the other vendors watched her closely, still trying to uncover her secret. Mama Chica and Papa Is exchanged glances, frustration etched on their faces. "We need to find out what she's doing," Mama Chica whispered to Papa Is. "It's driving me crazy." Papa Is nodded. "I know. But we have to be careful. If she finds out we are watching her, she'll be even more secretive." Despite their efforts, the vendors couldn't get close enough to see Chi-Chi's preparations. She worked quickly and efficiently, serving bowl after bowl to her eager customers. As the day wore on, the crowd at Chi-Chi's restaurant grew larger. People from neighboring villages continued to pour in, all wanting a taste of the famous stew. The other vendors could only watch in dismay as their restaurants remained mostly empty. "There's something not right about this," Mama Nkechi muttered to herself, stirring her pot of jollof rice. "We need to find out what it is." As the sun began to set and the market started to clear, Chi-Chi packed up her restaurant and headed home. She felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that her secret remained undiscovered. Back in her hut, Chi-Chi carefully cleaned her cooking utensils and prepared for the next day's market. She glanced at the container of urine and smiled to herself. "Tomorrow will be another successful day," she said softly, her eyes gleaming with determination. Every morning at precisely 7 a.m., Mama Cook would arrive at the market, pushing her cart laden with steaming pots of stew. By then, a long line of eager customers would already be waiting for her, chattering excitedly among themselves. "Here she comes," shouted Sharon, pointing as Chi-Chi approached. "I can't wait to get my hands on that stew." "Me too," replied Chica, her friend. "It's worth the wait." Chi-Chi greeted her customers with a warm smile, setting up her restaurant with practiced efficiency. She began serving bowl after bowl of her famous stew, the rich aroma wafting through the market. As the clock struck 12 noon, Chi-Chi followed her usual routine. She closed her restaurant temporarily, much to the disappointment of her waiting customers. "Why does she always close at noon?" wondered Judith, a regular customer. "But she always comes back with that black container." While the villagers speculated, Chi-Chi disappeared into a narrow alleyway behind the market. She carried with her a small black container, her secret companion. For the next 10 minutes, she would be out of sight, leaving her customers curious and impatient. "Do you think that container has something to do with her stew?" asked Mama Nkechi, whispering to Mama Chica. "It must," replied Mama Chica. "But what could it be? We need to find out." Chi-Chi returned to her restaurant exactly 10 minutes later, as always. The black container was now carefully hidden beneath her cart. She resumed serving her stew, the line of customers quickly reforming. As the day drew to a close, Chi-Chi packed up her restaurant, her secret still safe. She walked home, the black container intact, confident that no one would ever discover the real ingredient behind her extraordinary stew. Every time Mama Cook returned to her restaurant with the black container, she followed a peculiar routine. She would carefully open the container and pour its contents into her stew, stirring it thoroughly. Her customers, unaware of the secret ingredient, continued to line up eagerly for a taste of her magical stew. "Look at her," Mama Nkechi whispered to Mama Chika, watching Chichi from a distance. "She does it every day at noon." "I know," Mama Chika replied. "There's something in that container that makes her stew special. We need to find out what it is." The other food sellers grew increasingly curious and frustrated. They couldn't understand why Chichi always left her restaurant at exactly 12 noon and how she managed to attract so many customers. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't replicate her success. One afternoon, Mrs. Clara, a determined and brave food seller, decided to uncover the truth about Mama Cook's mysterious routine. She decided to make the worst decision of her life by trailing Mama Cook. At exactly 12 noon, Chichi closed her restaurant and headed off as usual, carrying her black container. Mrs. Clara discreetly followed, keeping a safe distance so as not to be noticed. She moved quickly but quietly, her heart pounding with anticipation. As Chichi wandered through the market and into the narrow alleyway, Mrs. Clara stayed on her trail. She watched as Chichi walked confidently, seemingly unaware of the eyes following her. The path led them away from the busy market and towards the outskirts of the village. Chichi approached a small, modest house at the edge of the village. Mrs. Clara's eyes widened as she realized this was Mama Cook's home. Mama Cook arrived home, her steps heavy with satisfaction from a successful day at the market. She carried the black container carefully, as if it were precious. Mrs. Clara, having followed her discreetly, watched from a distance, trying to remain unseen. Chichi entered her house and went straight to a back door leading to the backyard. She walked with purpose, oblivious to Mrs. Clara's quiet approach behind her. Mrs. Clara kept a safe distance, her eyes focused on the black container Chichi was holding. As Chichi reached the backyard, she placed the container on a small table near a garden shed. She looked around, seemingly to ensure she was alone. Mrs. Clara, hidden behind a large bush, held her breath and started peeping at her. Chichi unfastened her clothing and squatted over the container. The sound of her urination hitting the container was faint but clear to Mrs. Clara. She could barely contain her shock as she watched the dark liquid fill the container. "This can't be real," Mrs. Clara thought, her heart racing. She struggled to stay hidden, her mind reeling from the revelation. Just as Chichi was about to stand up and close the container, she glanced around and her eyes widened as they locked onto Mrs. Clara, who had mistakenly made a small noise. A tense silence filled the air. "What are you doing here?" Chichi's voice was sharp, her gaze narrowing with suspicion. "How dare you intrude?" Mrs. Clara stepped out from behind the bush, her face pale but resolute. "I followed you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I needed to know the truth." "The truth?" Chichi's eyes flashed with anger. "You're where you don't belong. This is none of your business." "I saw what you did," Mrs. Clara said, her voice gaining strength despite her fear. "Using your urine in the food. This is wrong. The villagers deserve to know." Chichi's expression hardened. "You've seen too much," she said, her tone cold and threatening. "If you tell anyone about this, you'll face consequences." "I'm not afraid of you," Mrs. Clara replied, her determination unwavering. "People have a right to know the truth. Your secret ends here." Mrs. Clara turned to flee from Mama Cook's backyard, her heart racing with fear. But before she could take more than a few steps, she heard Mama Cook's chilling laughter behind her. It was a high, unsettling sound that seemed to pierce through the calm afternoon air. "What is happening?" Mrs. Clara whispered to herself, trying to move faster. But her legs felt suddenly heavy, as if they were being pulled down by an unseen force. As Mama Cook's laughter grew louder, Mrs. Clara's vision began to blur. She staggered, her strength draining away rapidly. With a final, desperate cry, Mrs. Clara collapsed to the ground and died on the spot. Mama Cook approached her, her expression cold and unfeeling. "Such a shame," she said softly, her voice dripping with disdain. "You should have stayed away." "What a waste," Chichi muttered as she pulled Mrs. Clara inside her house. She moved the body into a dark corner of the kitchen, out of sight from any casual observer. "Your curiosity led you to an unfortunate end." Once Mrs. Clara was hidden away, Chichi stepped back and took a moment to survey the scene. Satisfied that there was no immediate evidence of her dark deeds, she turned to leave. She straightened her clothes and composed herself before heading back to her market restaurant. As she walked, she couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. "No one will dare question me again," she thought, a cold smile on her lips. Back at the market, Chichi resumed her routine with her usual charm and efficiency. The villagers, oblivious to the events of the afternoon, continued to queue for her food, eager for the taste that had become so mysteriously irresistible. Days passed, and the absence of Mrs. Clara grew increasingly noticeable among the food sellers. The market was quieter, with fewer vendors and a sense of unease hanging in the air. The other food sellers, deeply worried, discussed the situation in hushed tones. "I haven't seen Clara in days," said one seller, frowning as she looked at the empty space where Clara's restaurant used to be. "She wouldn't just disappear like this." Another seller nodded in agreement. "It's unlike her to be gone for so long without a word. Something must be wrong." Determined to find out what had happened, they approached Mama Cook's restaurant. Chichi was busy serving customers, her demeanor calm and composed. "Have you seen Clara?" one of the sellers asked, her tone urgent. "She hasn't been around for days." Chichi looked up, her face a mask of innocence. "Clara? I haven't seen her in a while," she replied, her voice smooth and untroubled. "I'm afraid I don't know where she is." The sellers exchanged worried glances. "That's strange," one said. "She was always here, and now she's just disappeared without a trace." As the conversation ended, the sellers walked away, still uneasy but with no answers. The market continued as usual, though the missing Clara cast a shadow over the vendors. One afternoon, a pastor arrived in town. He was weary and hungry from his travels, and his stomach growled with a deep, rumbling hunger. Spotting Mama Cook's restaurant, he made his way over, eager for a meal. "Excuse me," the pastor said, approaching Chichi with a kind smile. "I've heard you make wonderful food. Could I please have a meal?" Chichi greeted him with her usual warm smile. "Of course, Reverend," she said. "I'd be delighted to serve you. What would you like?" The pastor ordered a hearty meal and took a seat at one of the nearby benches. As Mama Cook prepared to serve the pastor, she noticed something that made her frown. The pastor had a Bible in his hand, a symbol of his faith that immediately set off a warning bell in Chichi's mind. She tried to push her unease aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. The pastor paid for his meal and sat at the bench, waiting patiently. Chichi placed the food in front of him with a practiced smile. "Here you go, Reverend. I hope you enjoy your meal." The pastor took a bite, but his expression quickly changed from pleasure to concern. He frowned, his face reflecting a deep unease. "Excuse me," he said, setting his fork down. "Could I ask you something?" Chichi's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly masked her apprehension. "Of course, Reverend. What's on your mind?" The pastor reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial of anointing oil. He began to pray softly, his voice steady and calm. "Heavenly Father, I ask for your guidance and protection in this place. May your spirit reveal any hidden darkness. Chichi's eyes widened with alarm. She had never encountered such a direct challenge before. "What are you doing?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The pastor looked at her with a piercing gaze. "I sense something is not right here," he said quietly. "Sometimes, the Lord reveals things through His Spirit. I must ensure that this food is safe and that there are no hidden dangers." As he finished his prayer, he carefully brought out his anointing oil. With a steady hand, he poured a single drop of the oil onto the food that Mama Cook had prepared. The moment the oil touches the food, a strange transformation occurred. The food began to glow with a strange, supernatural light. The aroma changed, becoming both intoxicating and unsettling. The people who had been eagerly eating or waiting in line suddenly stopped, their expressions shifting from anticipation to confusion. "What is happening?" one of the customers asked, his voice filled with alarm. He looked at the glowing food and then at Mama Cook, suspicion growing in his eyes. The pastor raised his voice, his tone commanding. "This food has been enchanted. It's not just food, it's a charm. It has been used to control and deceive you all." The crowd gasped, their faces reflecting a mix of shock and realization. The enchantment that had clouded their judgment seemed to lift, and they began to understand the gravity of the situation. "Is this true?" another customer demanded, staring at Mama Cook. "Have you been deceiving us?" Feeling the weight of the crowd's anger, Mama Cook's face turned pale. She tried to maintain her composure but failed. "Yes, it's true," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I've been using my urine to make the food irresistible. And I killed Mrs. Clara." The confession sent a ripple of horror through the crowd. Clara's disappearance, once a mystery, was now linked to Mama Cook's dark practices. The anger of the people was palpable, and their mamas turned into shouts. "How could you do this?" one of the sellers shouted. "You've been using us all along." The pastor stepped back, giving the crowd space to react. "This is a serious crime. We must make sure justice is served," he said, his voice solemn. Mama Cook's pleas for mercy were drowned out by the rising fury of the crowd. "Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she cried, but her words fell on deaf ears. The crowd surged forward, picking up stones and other makeshift weapons. "You need to pay for what you've done," someone shouted as they threw the first stone. Mama Cook stumbled and fell to the ground, but the crowd showed no mercy as Mama Cook was lynched instantly to death. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to be notified whenever we post new video. See you in my next video.